Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cherry the Geek TV. I'm Joe Vanourney. Today, we are joined by Christian Swegal. He is the writer and director of a brand new film called Sovereign, starring Nick Offerman, Jacob Tremblay, and Dennis Quaid. It just premiered recently at the Tribeca Film Festival and is scheduled to open in theaters everywhere on July 11th from Briarcliff Entertainment. Christian, welcome to Cherry the Geek TV.
Hi, nice to be here.
So set up the film for people. What is Sovereign? How do you describe it to people when you're telling them about the film?
Well, Sovereign is a dramatic crime thriller loosely based on a true story, a crime that took place in Arkansas in 2010, where two sovereign citizens, a guy named Jerry Kane and his son, his 15-year-old son, Joe Kane, were traveling the country giving a debt reduction seminar to people after the 2008 housing crisis. And while they were traveling, they had a run-in with police and ended up shooting and killing two police officers. And ultimately, they were hunted down in the end.
So when you're putting together a film like this based on true events, uh, you can follow the facts, to the T. You can embellish things for dramatic purposes, move things around. Walk me through your process. How close to the real story is your film? And as you're constructing a film, and you want it to be entertaining, and you want it to be informative, but maybe things don't kind of fit the timeline correctly. How do you put a film like that together? What's your process?
Yeah, so this film is much more memoir than it is autobiography. It's not a beat by beat retelling of the crime. The crime is it's why it's inspired by it's a launching off point. Some aspects like the Jerry Kane storyline, we stayed very close to, and some of the speeches or some of the stuff is actually verbatim things that he said that you can find in videos online and stuff like that. But out of respect for the other people involved and for the victims in this crime, we fictionalized the rest of it. So we, early on in talking to, different members of law enforcement who were involved, it was pretty clear that, we didn't want to tread into that territory too much and try to kind of make up storylines or overly embellish things, with victims' families and stuff that we didn't know anything about and didn't want to sort of intrude on. So we kept the true part of the story is really contained to Jerry and Joe, and then the rest of it is fictionalized.
So this is your first film? First
It
feature?
is, it is, yes.
So when you heard about this story, when did you first hear about this story, and what was it about that inspired you and said, this is the story I want to tell for my first film?
Yeah, I mean, I had a personal experience with some people who had some ideas like this in real life, some family members, and I've always been drawn to stories about people who are interested in fringe ideologies. I find it really fascinating, all the different kind of fringe political ideologies, conspiracy theories, cults. How does a person who seems to be functioning really normally in some aspect of life or in most aspects of life find themselves drawn to movements like that? So I was really interested in telling a story of a young guy, like a coming of age story of Joe Kane's character is 15 years old, and what must it have been like to grow up homeschooled and surrounded by this sort of information bubble that he was raised in. And then what happens when you are a teenager and you want to start exploring and you want to start dating or having friends, like that breaking away from that can really feel like a betrayal towards the people that are closest to you, in a way. And I have some personal experience with that. And so from a sort of just a human standpoint, I was really interested in the father and son storyline, and from the coming of age storyline of Joe Kane. And then, but I also just felt like this crime was a very fertile sort of ground to talk about a lot of themes that I'm interested in, and I think are really relevant and timely in the country right now. There's like I said, things are sort of very fractured, ideologically, politically in the country right now. The movie really explores sort of ideas of gun culture and policing, and how do we deal with mental health? How do we deal with what's our sort of social safety net in the country? So I think it was a way to talk about a lot of those themes as well.
Let's talk about your amazing cast in the film. Let's start with Nick Offerman, who plays Jerry Kane. Uh, Great performance. He's known for his comedy work before, but as he's proved with his dramatic turns and stuff like The Last of Us, and then now with your film Sovereign, he's a great dramatic actor. Talk about him and why he was cast and what made him a great Jerry Kane.
Yeah, I mean, Nick is been one of my favorite actors for forever, and I thought he did an incredible job with this role. I think his performances really stand out, and I think what's interesting about this performance in particular for him is, like, we've seen him play a father, we've seen him play that sort of paternal warmth, and then in The Last of Us, we've seen kind of like more of the prepper, conspiracy driven character. And I think this role sort of brings together a lot of those facets. You get to see him. He plays very warm and very paternal, but then he can ramp and get very scary and sort of physically menacing and deranged feeling in this. And so he has wide swings. And also he had expressed early on like a real interest to play a character, and I think he said this in other interviews, but to play a character that was sort of like a traveling preacher, almost like somebody who was evangelizing. And that's very much his character in this movie. He's going from town to town with his pitch, almost like a traveling preacher, really.
And then you also have the great Jacob Tremblay. People might remember him from the movie Room about a decade ago. He's all grown up now, older teen, uh, and and man, what a great performance, right? Where Nick Offerman does external, everything's externalized and loud. Jacob's performance is very internalized, right? You can see the emotions and his thoughts just by staring into his face, and you can see him struggling. Talk about him, his performance, why you cast him, and why he makes a great Joe Kane.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it right there. I mean, Jerry is very external and bombastic and big, and Jacob's performance is really internal and contained and quiet, and that can be so hard to direct, and it can just feel flat if it's not really inhabited. But Jacob just really inhabited this role, and I think there's never there's a lot of quiet moments in the film with him, but he's constantly saying something in those moments. Just his expressions, his looks. He's very much, you know, um, he's just inhabiting the character, and that's something that's really, you know, I would think it would be very difficult to direct. I wasn't in the circumstance, luckily, of having that be a difficulty for me. I could just kind of say action, and Jacob did his thing. So, but he's a brilliant young actor. I mean, I think he's one of the finest of his generation, certainly. So
And then you've also got the great Dennis Quaid in a law enforcement role. Been around for decades, true movie star. Talk about Dennis Quaid, why you cast him, and what was it like to work with him?
yeah, I mean, Dennis is Dennis Quaid. He's one of the legendary, movie stars, and it's, I think, because of his experience, he showed up, he knew what he wanted to do. I completely agreed with what he wanted to do. There wasn't a lot of there it wasn't an iterative process with him. He just very directly got to the right answer and knew how he wanted to play things. And beyond that, he was just so kind and wonderful to work with. As a first time director working with these legendary actors, there could be frustration there, or he could question whether I knew what I was doing, and he didn't at all. He just was a wonderful collaborator and was really embraced the whole thing. And I think his performance is fantastic.
You mentioned that you, when preparing for the film and doing research on these types of people with these kinds of mindsets, you have experience with that. But you did you also talk to people? And as you were doing your research and talking to people, did you discover like what do you think is the main thing behind them? Is it mental illness? Is it just wanting to be a part of a group, going against the norm? A little bit of both, something else like what's kind of your take on why people like this uh come about?
Yeah, no, I mean that's kind of the question that I'm interested in. I don't know that I have the complete answer, but I think in my personal experience and the research I did, I found, a lot people came to it from a lot of different places, but I think the through line was that the system had failed them in some way, and that was very real. I think a lot of people, it was out of financial desperation. In some cases, a lot of cases, there was certainly a mental health component. There was the component of wanting community, and if somebody like a Jerry Kane or somebody else putting forward an answer and somebody clinging to that answer, and it was the wrong answer, but they're clinging to it. I think there's a lot of bad information out there. But I think that bad information is able to thrive when the traditional sources of good information have led people astray also. So there's a lot of nuance to it. But I think the underlying factor is, you can say the answers that they're clinging to are maybe wrong and misguided, but the things that are driving them to those places, like the injury they've suffered or the pressure that they're feeling, is very valid. It's very real. So I think there's a knee-jerk response to just kind of flatly condemn or to say, well, this person's crazy or stupid or whatever. But if you dig into most of the stories, there's something very real and valid that you'd say, well, yeah, that would kind of drive me that would drive me crazy too, and I'd be trying to figure that out. And so it's not to excuse anything that happens in the film, but I think it's, hopefully it's a movie that makes people think. I don't profess to have the answers to any of these things, and I think that may be unsatisfying to some viewers. But hopefully it's a movie that makes people question these things and starts a discussion about it.
I'm wondering if you think that the internet has had an influence on this type of thing. Nick Offerman's character is one of these guys. I'm a sovereign citizen, right? And we see videos from people on social media of them getting pulled over by cops, and it's like you can't ticket me. I am a sovereign citizen. Or his character goes to court. You have no, Your Honor, you have no authority over me. I'm a sovereign citizen. Uh, do you think people like that always existed and we just didn't know about it because there was no internet where we can see them instantly
Yeah.
every day? Or do you think the internet is responsible for validating the opinions like that and pulling people who never would have met otherwise, pulling them together and say, "Oh, this person's like me, this person's like me. Now we're a group," and the group gets larger and larger because they're validating each other's opinions, even if the facts aren't supportive
Yeah.
of that. Uh,
Yeah.
what's your take on it? How is the
Yeah.
internet influenced
I,
that?
I think that's spot on. I mean, I think sovereign citizens were sort of like it. You can trace the movement back to like posse comitatus stuff and militia movement. That it's sort of like started in one place and then branched out in a million other places, and now there's QAnon and there's all of the offshoots of that. Certainly, the internet has, like, I think, helped the proliferation of these ideas and has helped kind of organize people around. It's like throwing gasoline on the fire. I think, though, if you look back to, like, I'm not an expert in this subject, but even just sovereign citizens, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, like there were newsletters going around, there were meetups. I knew people who were involved in this kind of thinking pre-internet. Family members. So I think it's existed because there's a general. Well, I don't know why actually. I think it has existed, but certainly the internet has amplified the issue, and I think people are much more aware of it today because of that.
What was the biggest challenge you faced when making the film? And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, what was something maybe that you thought going in was going to be a challenge and it ended up being a pleasant surprise? Like, oh, this worked out.
Yeah. Um, Boy, the challenges of making the film, this production had quite a few challenges. I mean, the challenges were just getting to make an independent film. I think getting a movie made is so hard, and I think ultimately when the film comes out, all those none of those stories matter. Like for instance, we had 2 days scheduled for I don't know if I should give spoilers, but for the big sort of, there's an action scene in the movie. We had 2 days scheduled for that, but then there were lightning strikes and we lost a day. So now we had to shoot it in one day rather than 2 days. So, you don't think about how, all of those sort of logistics. We had locations fall through or financing troubles. It's all, you're kind of building the plane as it's taking off in a lot of ways when you're making an independent film. So the chaos of all of that, I think, was really difficult. And then in terms of something that wasn't difficult, I was very nervous as this being my first feature directing, about working with the actors. Oh man, what if if I'm going to be so nervous, or and that was just the opposite experience of what I feared. They were so lovely and welcoming, and it was like every one of them was like, "Here, we're going to help you. We're going to help you make this thing." And also just I was really touched by the buy-in. I mean, it's truly, like the movie, don't like the movie, whatever you think about it. This was really a labor of love for everybody involved, and we all put our hearts into it. So I think I was really happy about that.
I always like to ask people who are making their first film, what were your inspirations growing up? Was there a film? Was there a TV show? Was there a performance? What inspired you to like, this is the direction I want to go in my life, make a movie?
I I don't know that there was one necessary. I was always drawn to I don't know, movies were always I was a shy kid, and so movies were always like a very safe and comfortable place for me to sort of retreat to. And anytime, the same way, like I think a lot of people feel this way about sports. Like you can sit down and not know somebody and start talking about sports, and then you have something to talk about for the next like 5 hours. That was movies for me always. I love the process of seeing a film and then connecting with somebody else about it. And I love, for that reason, I love films. And I've said this in a few other interviews, but like I love films that ask questions. My favorite type of movie is a movie that you watch and it leaves you with something to discuss afterwards. Like the audience has to do some of the lifting on their own. And that communal process of like, I'm going to see this film, my friend's going to see the film, I have thoughts about it, but now we're going to talk and like really get into it. And there's things that we're going to uncover, and then we might watch it again and there's more stuff. Like that process of it is really what I love about filmmaking and watching films.
So, film recently had its premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival. What was that experience like, getting to see it with an audience, talking to them afterwards? Did anything stand out from that? And as we're recording this, you're a day out from showing the film at the Bentonville Film Festival in Arkansas, where the film takes place. Two different regions of the country, might be completely different types of audiences. What do you think? How do you think the film's going to play there in comparison to Tribeca?
Yeah, I mean, so Tribeca was a dream come true. It was we had this incredible premiere in New York City. It's a premiere festival. Everybody came out. It was really a highlight personally and professionally. That's obviously very one type of audience. And then in Bentonville, Arkansas, we're having a very different type of audience. And what I think is what I'm proud of about the film is I think although we're dealing with political subject matter in a sense, like the material has a political uh, element to it. It's not a political film. It's a film that's really about people, and I think that we tried to be as even-handed as possible in the treatment of it. So I hope that I hope and I think I expect that the audience here will have a similar reaction to the audience at Tribeca. Hopefully they leave the movie, moved and with something to think about.
Well, if everybody in the country can see the film starting July 11th, where it will be opening in theaters, is there anything else when audiences see the film that you hope they take away from them? What's the main thing that you hope they take from them?
I guess what I hope they take away from it is just to I hope that it makes them think, and I hope they talk about it with their friends. I don't want to imprint the meaning on it. There certainly is a lot of meaning in the movie. There's a lot of layers of theme and sort of motifs that we tried to embed in the film, but I think giving that away would spoil it. So I know for some people that might feel like too much work, but I hope that they do sort of dig into it and think about what we're trying to say.
Well, it's a great film. The film's called Sovereign, starring Nick Offerman, Jacob Tremblay, Dennis Quaid. This is Christian Swegal. The film opens everywhere July 11th, called Sovereign from Briarcliff Entertainment. Christian, thank you so much for chatting with us today on Cherry the Geek TV.
Thank you very much.
Hello? 1-1, where is your emergency? Exit 275 on 40. These guys just shot a police officer right on the exit.
I need to ask you a few questions. Maybe you can help me get to the bottom of what happened. Can you do that for me? You two were on some kind of road trip?
My dad travels for work.
There is no money. It's all just numbers on a ledger, and when it all comes collapsing down, who do you think they expect to come around and clean up the mess?
What about school?
I'm homeschooled. He says that he wants me to be an independent thinker.
Power's in the people. Always remember that.
We found some weapons in the van you were driving. Your father has, he ever been violent?
Next time, aim more for the head. You know, they wear bulletproof vests.
It sounds to me like your dad doesn't like the government very much.
They demand that you beg. They're sick like that. You know, they're psychotic, psychopaths.
I mean, I don't want to have to kill anybody. But if they keep messing with me, then I'm afraid that's what it's going to come down to. And if I have to kill one, then I'm not going to be able to stop. I just know it.
They think they can just, keep squeezing blood out of a stone. But at some point, you have to let them know that you won't be pushed any further.
This is an illegal stop.
Sir, get back in the car.
What law did I break?
Get back in the
Tell me
car
what
right
law
now.
I broke and I'll comply.
Sir?
They're sick in the head, that's all. So we just gotta play their silly-ass little games. And go in there and kill the monster under the bed.